Good morning, NFI. It is Friday, and this week the topic is the small world. I didn't sign up for this topic initially because I wasn't sure whether I actually had anything in particular to talk about. But then I remembered something that people say about Sheffield sometimes, and that is that it doesn't really feel like a city. It is, in fact, the largest village, and that is a sentiment that I kind of agree with. Now, depending on how you measure, like where you take the borders, whether you're talking area or whether you're talking population or whether you're talking density, when you're talking about the biggest cities in this country, Sheffield ranks somewhere between 3rd and 10th, depending on where you're limiting things. And yet, despite Sheffield ranking so highly, it also has one of the smallest city centres, at least in terms of ratio of area covered by the city compared to city centre. For some reason, Sheffield seems to have ended up a bit more distributed. Dotted throughout the city are more sort of local centres, and it's more like a community of communities than it is one, like, just single whole. And these communities have a kind of identity of their own, but not so much that you would consider them to be a separate suburb. They're just like a special section of Sheffield. And it's those communities together combined that make Sheffield. I can't say whether Sheffield is like unique in that aspect throughout the entire world, but at least in my personal experience of cities of a similar size, there's nothing quite like Sheffield out there. So it's like combining the best bits of a village with the best bits of a city. In the process, avoiding some of the downsides of those two things. So like it's large enough that you don't get the village effect of, everybody knows everybody and exactly what they're up to, and the gossip gets shared around everywhere. But it also does keep that sort of friendly vibe that some other larger cities don't quite have. You're far more likely to have a brief conversation with a stranger in Sheffield than you are in anywhere, say, like Manchester or Birmingham or Glasgow. And that's probably one of the things that gives Sheffield its particularly high student retention rate. So many people come to Sheffield for its two universities and then stay, myself included. You are probably familiar with the concept of 6 degrees of separation, where you can generally link two people with a connection of only 6 people on average. But I have found on multiple occasions in Sheffield the average seems to be much lower than that. Multiple times I've met someone new in Sheffield and eventually the conversation will end up somewhere and it'll be like, oh, you know so-and-so, yeah, I've met them. Even often bridging different social circles that you wouldn't necessarily expect, because of the slightly atypical interconnected community aspect of this city. There are often connections you wouldn't expect to find. But possibly I'm talking nonsense. I have visited a wide variety of cities, but I've only ever lived for a particularly long time in Manchester and then Sheffield. But the fact that I have heard this said by other people does lend some weight to it being truth. And so that is my small world, living in a giant village that's pretending to be a city. Who have we got coming up next? Well, next week we don't actually have anyone on the schedule yet. Would you be interested in making a video on the topic of language? In which case, sign up with the website, links on the end screen and down in the doobly-doo.